Hey there, welcome to episode 122 of the Social Business Engine podcast. This is the podcast where thought leaders from brands, technology companies, and also independent thought leaders contribute to your social business strategy to help you get better business results and to positively impact your career. I'm Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. On this episode, you are going to meet Ryan Garcia, Legal Director at Dell. Ryan will discuss the role of legal in social media engagement at Dell. Now, this episode is sponsored by Outward Media, Inc., a leader in the direct marketing industry. Later in the show, I'll tell you about a valuable offer from Outward Media. And now, here's my interview with Ryan Garcia, Legal Director at Dell. Ryan, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Oh, happy to be here, Bernie.
Well, Ryan, congratulations. You are the very first lawyer that I have ever had on my podcast.
Well, congratulations to you for being brave enough to have a lawyer on your podcast.
Well, bravery is not exactly one of those attributes that I hear in reference to me too often. I won't go down that path on what I do here, but why don't we begin, Ryan, with what is your role as legal director at Dell?
So I have a couple of different client groups. One of them is our consumer retail business in North America, so where we have boxes in Walmart and Best Buy. I also support our gaming brand, which is Alienware, because that's a lot of fun. But I think the reason why we're talking is because I also support the global social media and communities team at Dell. So I provide them with legal support, whether it's drafting, our social media policy, or working on different social media promotions, or figuring out and training people on the legal rules around social media, or working with our award-winning social media training organization, SmackU.
Award-winning and SmackU, two things I definitely want to talk about. Well, first of all, as you referenced, Ryan, the reason we are here today is to talk about how you support Dell's social media and community team. And as you know, and perhaps some of my listeners, depending on how far back they go with my Social Business Engine podcast, Amy Heiss, who leads up the Global SmackU, Social Media and Community University at Dell, was a previous guest on my show, and we talked about what is SmackU and the whole history. And so maybe you can elaborate specifically on what is your role as it relates to supporting SmackU at Dell.
Yeah, when it comes to that, so just to be clear, I did not start the training organization, and I came into supporting the team after it was just starting up. And this was back in, I think, 2009. But because at the time social media was so new, and also as a lawyer I knew there's so much value on getting involved early with risk areas, getting involved with training efforts, trying to prevent these risks from ever popping up. I saw a huge opportunity to kind of get in on the ground floor with this new topic, this new organization, and really try to get some of those legal lessons into this training program. So from the start that they launched, I worked with that training team to just incorporate legal content into the amazing classes they were already making. I attended all their classes. For a while, actually, Amy and I trained some of these classes before they had some much better trainers come in. So I've been involved kind of from that first year just to work at getting the legal topics integrated into all of the different modules that they offer.
Awesome. So before we get too much further into that, I don't want to gloss over really how I kind of became aware of your role at SmackU, and that is you published this awesome article on your LinkedIn profile about this award that you guys won. So you want to speak to that, and then we'll come back to the whole integration of legal into SmackU.
Sure. This was, it was just such an amazing story because I've already mentioned the training itself, but our training program, I'm just such a huge fan of it, not just because I love the idea of, getting that message out there, trying to prevent these risks rather than solve them once they've already happened. And so I've always evangelized our training program. Not just internally at Dell, but also externally when I talk to other people who are working in the social media legal, area.
By the way, Ryan, so have I. I mean, since I've become known of it, and I had the privilege of having Amy on my podcast to discuss it, I also have been an evangelist waving the flag. So I'm there with
great.
you.
Yeah, and it's such, it just makes such perfect sense, especially in the social media world. Let's be honest, there's so many fascinating stories of brands that have done bad things or bad things that have happened to brands that you can tell really interesting stories and also teach people at the same time. So it's such a win, across the board. So I've always told people, Dell really has a best-in-class training program, and I don't try to brag about that. I'm not saying that's a category. I'm saying I don't know of a better training program that's out there. Just the breadth of classes that we offer, the training, the hand-holding that we do for people that need it. There's just so much that goes on, and I'm always such a fan. And so when we were nominated for this award, and it was by... I'm blanking on the name of the organization, but it was an industry award. It was going to be presented in New York, and we were clumped in with a number of social media campaigns that, are by brands that do so much more on social media in terms of how much they spend, how much you might see. Our training program, and it's our training program, which people don't see outside of Dell, really. But we were up against, efforts by Chevrolet. We were up against Bud Light. We were up against Lenovo. We're up against all these social media campaigns that people have seen because they're actually, for most of them, consumer-facing advertising campaigns. They even had the Chevy campaign, where Chevy goes emoji, where you might have seen those commercials where, consumers are asked to describe a Chevy using just emojis.
Right,
everyone's kind of seen those at this point. So to have our training program just even in the mix, that's really nice to be recognized, and I don't think anyone expected to win. And then we won. And it was just such an amazing moment, not only for the person that was actually there, Sean Carey, one of our trainers. He was there, and total surprise. But it was just so great to see organizations outside of Dell recognizing the value and the innovation that can be put into a training program to really bring that message, to employees, to train them the right way to do social media. The legal part is just such a small element of it, but at least in my world, it's crucial. But I was just so pleased to see that effort rewarded outside of Dell, in the broader social media industry. So I wrote about just the value that legal places on a training program, or at least that I place on this, but also within the broader context of, you can be innovative when you're doing training programs, and training programs are really important.
Yep. Okay, so now Dell, for those listeners that perhaps may not be aware of just the breadth, the size of Dell as an organization, correct me if I'm wrong, headcount is in the neighborhood of 110,000 employees. Is that a reasonable number?
I think that's right, and we're in the middle of quite a large transaction, and so if and when that is completed, it will be significantly bigger.
Yep. Okay, so we'll leave the transaction off to the side, and today, as we record this, you're 110,000 people. Look, that's a pretty large organization. So just the fact that there's a training program is impressive alone. The Smack You training initiative, as you pointed out, it's in the range of 6 years old, 7 years old, give or take. Very mature at this point. But now let's specifically talk about, you said something that really gets my attention. You also said this in your article, and that's the value of getting involved early in risk areas. So can you elaborate on what you mean by that in the context of employees being trained to engage on behalf of Dell and use social media in their engagement?
Yeah. So I think that every lawyer certainly knows this, but really anyone who works in a risk management field or any area that deals with risks, which is approximately all of them, is that it is so much more valuable to invest in training than it is to try to correct the mistakes that training could have prevented. And so, having a program out there that can teach people the right ways to engage in social media, the right disclosures you need to make, at least from my world, the rules that you need to follow, the ways that you do and do not engage with people on certain platforms, and your overall strategy for moving forward is always going to be so much more beneficial than just sending people out there, having them make mistakes, and then having to correct the mistakes, right? Because once the mistakes happen, of course you're going to have to fight that backlash. You're going to have to perhaps face the negative public sentiment that's out there. But then at the end of all of those, you're probably doing training anyway.
Right.
Only now you're doing that reactive training like, hey guys, remember when you did that? Really shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
It would be so much better if you did it beforehand. And so that's, to me, is the real value that you can bring to those social media engagements, is that, teaching them the right way to do it. And honestly, in the social media world, you can point to so many stories out there to say, see, like, this is what happened to one brand when they did it the wrong way, or this is what happened to one person when they posted this bad content. And you can use those stories, and they really resonate, right? They're not these hypothetical scenarios, but they're actual real-world examples, and they connect with people. They remember those stories.
Sure. So, Ryan, without giving away anything that's proprietary or private information to Dell, are there any guidelines that you can share that you teach Dell employees on, how to engage and stay out of trouble and do it the way you want them to?
Yeah, actually, I'm happy to share it with you. I can't share you, the entire training program just because we don't have that kind of time. But at least in terms of our social media principles are public. We share them with the world, and we have a social media policy that's really more of a description of what our 5 social media principles are, and anyone can see them. It's at Dell.com/social media policy. And so you can see the 5 core principles that we teach to everyone that goes through these training programs. A number of them you can almost automatically see, the legal integration, especially, one of them, which is follow the law and follow the code, which is to obey, the rules that you need to. But other topics and other principles also at least intersect with my world. One of the big ones being be transparent. That's not only a good idea for brands engaging on social media, because we've seen plenty of examples where people don't disclose their relationship, and there's just some backlash to that, right? We can think of the Kim Kardashian Instagram tweet where she didn't disclose that she was being paid to promote a certain product, right? And people kind of call that out. Aren't you supposed to say that this is an ad?
Right.
But there's also some legal requirements to do that. And so it's not only, something good in the public's eye, but it's also good so that the regulators don't come knocking.
Right. Okay. All right. I want to elaborate on that a little bit more and talk about maybe some of the common mistakes that you see in general. You just referenced one, and so maybe there's some others. But before we do that, Ryan, I just want to pause for a brief message from our sponsor. Outward Media, Inc. is a leader in the direct marketing industry, providing businesses access to the largest SMB email database for the acquisition of new customers. OMI has a commitment to data accuracy that I find very impressive because it helps you identify your best prospects so that you can generate more qualified leads. In fact, OMI offers a 95% accuracy guarantee on all email data for 30 days. I urge you to download OMI's ebook, The Executive's 15-Minute Guide to Building a Successful Email Marketing Database, to discover the essentials for improving email deliverability. Now, when I read this ebook, I discovered at least 3 things that we needed to address. It's really a must-read for all digital marketers. You can get your copy now at outwardmedia.com/SBE, and you can also find the link to this ebook at our website at socialbusinessengine.com. So, Ryan, maybe in the B2B world, have you seen some worst practices, things that B2B companies need to pay attention to? And I only mention B2B because Dell is largely B2B. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know you've got a direct-to-consumer arm, but some people may not know that there's a huge part of the company that's really largely B2B. So from a practices standpoint, what are some things that we want to make sure that we're thinking about when we're engaging in social media to stay friendly with you in the legal department and not get you upset?
So many things can get me upset. But no, I'll tell you that the number one thing, and I think that this is true in a B2B context as well as in a strict consumer context, and just in a general social media context, It's the need to disclose your relationship with your brand, your company, your organization when you are talking about it. Mm-hmm. There's a very long document by the FTC Endorsement Guidelines, which talks about how you have other people come in and talk about your brand, endorsers, people that you may or may not pay, and the disclosures that they need to make. But within that document and in further kind of FTC decisions, the FTC has said that those also apply to employees or members of an organization. You need to disclose when you work for that organization if you're talking about them.
Ryan, I'm sorry. Does that need to be on a post-by-post basis, like Twitter, for example, if someone's tweeting 2, 3, 4, 10 times a day, or is it just sufficient to have it in their profile?
That's a great question. I get that every single time. Unfortunately, it's not enough to have it in your profile. It's great to have it in your profile, and we certainly wouldn't discourage anyone from doing it. The problem with that is, social media content goes viral. Mm-hmm. It gets shared to networks that are not directly connected to you. So when I hear that comment a lot, it's mostly not just on Twitter but also on Facebook. Oh, everyone that I'm connected with knows I work for Dell, so I don't need to say that. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, yes, you do, because your content could be shared with people that don't know who you are. So the disclosure needs to travel with the actual post itself. It's great to have it in the bio because people may click back and see it, but there's not a high chance of them doing that. If it's in the post itself, then it will travel with that content.
But just so I'm clear, because truthfully, this is a legitimate question I have. It doesn't need to be in the tweet, but if I'm sharing an article, it needs to be in the article. Am I right about that, or am I wrong?
It's, there's a little bit of a gray area. And here's the favorite lawyer answer for any question you ask us. It depends. Right? It depends on the context of you sharing, and it depends on what you are sharing. There's been a little bit more leniency when people are simply retweeting or sharing a link from an external article without any kind of commentary. That being said, within certain contexts, even that can trigger the need to disclose. That comes with sometimes heightened regulatory requirements, like when a company is acquiring another one. There was an incident a few years ago with there was a company that was acquiring like one of the car sharing services, and so they were simply sharing an article from, I think, the Boston Globe about the transaction, but later the SEC came in and said, no, you need to disclose that that's part of this action, right? So there's a lot of different contexts. What we at least train internally is that any time employees are talking about Dell, they should use the hashtag #IWorkForDell with the number 4. And so we like that to travel with anything that's relating to it. It doesn't mean everything you tweet, right? It's not like, oh, the line at Starbucks is really long today, I work for Dell. No, you don't need to say that, right? But if you are talking about Dell, our products, our services, then you need to disclose. And where there's even a gray area within the gray area is when you're talking about the industry in general, right? If you're talking about just the Internet of Things, there probably isn't a need to disclose. But if you're talking about Dell's efforts within the Internet of Things, then you probably do. What the FTC is, the guidance that they have given us is not cut and dry. There's not a bright line. But what they have said is you have to look at your social media posts from the perspective of the person who's reading it. If the person reading your post would think about the post differently if you disclosed your relationship, then you need to disclose. So that's the kind of thing that you need to think about, and then organizations can come up with their own rules for implementing.
Okay. So, again, back to 110,000 employees. You can train 110,000 employees, but how do you govern? I notice I snuck the word governance in there, right? I figure that resonates well with you, Ryan, because you're a lawyer. So how do you govern that?
Favorite word. Oh, it's great.
Not all of my listeners are at a large company like Dell, but still, governing that, you can train them, but how do you actually, I'll even you use the word enforce and, make sure it happens? Yeah.
That is always a difficult thing to come up with, and really it's all part of kind of a 4-step process involving social media. I think that it's about, what do you do in terms of developing a strategy? What do you do in terms of training to that strategy? Then how are you monitoring to make sure that the strategy and the training is being followed? And then finally, what's the governance around all of that? and then it all becomes a cycle, right, to kind of build back. Okay, well, do we need to tweak the strategy and the governance and the training and all that? But I will say we do have a governance program within Dell. It has morphed over the years from dedicated headcount to now kind of a broad work group that meets on a monthly basis to kind of look at issues and how we deal with particular violations of our policy or instances where we want to get involved. It really varies. I will say that's kind of something that's always going to be a work in progress. But I will say the most effective thing to having any kind of governance and any kind of monitoring at any large organization, it's not just the tools that you use, but honestly, it comes back to that training. Because, of course Dell has amazing social media listening tools. We have a whole listening command center, and you can find pictures of it. It looks like that room from War Games, right, where you've got all these large screens and you're watching things. Yeah, it's awesome. I will say that 9 times out of 10, when something comes to my desk in terms of a potential crisis, it is not coming from the command center. It's not because they're bad. They're fantastic. I love those guys, and I love the tools that they're using. But we have so many people who are trained on how to do social media the right way that when they come across something that they see is being done the wrong way, they bring it to our attention. You can get all the tools that you want in the world, and nothing will beat having an educated and well-trained workforce that knows the right way to do social media.
Okay. So when you deliver this training, Ryan, when you're training employees and they're going through the training curriculum at SmackU at Dell, how do you deliver the training in a way where employees view you as their friend as opposed to someone who's trying to tie their hands behind their back?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's well, rule number 1 is you don't have the lawyer in the room. That's just that's just the easiest thing to do. But we have that amazing SmackU team. We have not just Amy in terms of leading it. Sean is one of our great trainers that I mentioned before. Jenny Newman is one of the members who has created a lot of the content. She also does the training. We even have Gretchen Gerritsen on kind of like leading all the back end kind of administrative details. It all works together seamlessly, but one of the things that they have done to make that content more engaging is exactly what they won the award for that we talked about at the beginning, is that we have taken the kind of first generation of this social media training program, and they brought it into the second wave of social media. That's what I like to call it, because back when we launched training in 2009, social media was so new that the people that were signing up for the training classes were really interested in it, right? They were people that said, oh, this is fascinating. I want to learn more. I want to know how to do the right thing. And now we're in the second wave. Social media is now being forced on groups, right? There are entire organizations that are saying, you must be on social media. And so now you've got a lot of people who are being pushed onto these platforms that don't want to be there in the first place. So they need to be presented that information in a slightly more engaging way, and in a slightly easier to consume manner. And so they took the 8 hours of certification that we used to require for employees, and they squeezed it down to the essentials, and they made it 4 hours, and they also made it completely interactive. So the training program that they do now is this interactive crime scene. Like you walk into the room and you're immediately deputized, and you are now a social media detective, and you actually go online and you use social media platforms to discover tools, to learn the right way to do things, and to also find out when other people have been doing the wrong things on social media. And it's just a fantastic exercise that really communicates not only principles, but the right ways to get engaged on some of those platforms.
So what I hear you saying, Ryan, then is that you said at the beginning of this conversation around this topic is that you're not in the room, but the legal elements are basically essentially baked into the curriculum and then delivered by the trainers. Is that right?
Exactly. I've learned whenever you need to deliver bad news, you have someone else do it, right? So it's and it's not actually bad news. It's really just the right way to do things. And I work with Sean and Jenny and Amy and Gretchen just to make sure that whenever they're offering some kind of new content, that the whatever legal elements need to be there are incorporated into the content.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've always said that governance done right should give people confidence because now they know how to do it, as opposed to being scared and wondering if they're doing it right or wrong from the standpoint of compliance with legal issues. So
yeah,
sounds
absolutely.
like you're doing it.
And in the social media world, where this is all about conversations, there are very few industries that require the amount of regulation and approval that like every single message needs to be reviewed and approved. And I get it. Like some of those industries just have to deal with those limitations. But for everyone else, you really can't do it that way. You can't have a conversation that requires 8 levels of approvals for every single message. And so really the way to succeed is to give everyone the necessary tools to do it the right way and empower them to go out and do it, without having to come back to legal to say, hey, can I tweet yes, in response to a question. I mean, it's not helpful. So we just want to give people the tools to do it the right way and then say, go do it.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, Ryan, we are at a point now in the podcast where I am going to summarize the key points that we discussed, and then I'm going to ask you to fill in any holes or any corrections or just elaborate on anything that I include in my summary. So we began our conversation with you kind of describing your role and how, from a legal standpoint, you support retail, gaming, and then, of course, the global social media and community team, which is the SmackU training organization, and how we met online through this article you wrote about how you guys won this awesome award, and this award was prestigious because you were competing against really best-in-class brands, but you, of course, have a best-in-class training program at Dell, and it was recognized as both valuable and innovative. And so you wrote this article on not only was it prestigious and honored to win, but also kind of reinforcing the value of getting involved from a legal standpoint early in the process and doing training on the front end. And you talked about how it's way more valuable to invest in that training on the front end to help people understand the right ways to engage in social, with the most important thing being around the right disclosures, so that if there are mistakes that happen, first of all, there should be fewer. But if there are mistakes, then training is going to be necessary anyway. So you really emphasize the value of doing as much training on this on the front end as possible. You also talked about a 4-step process around this: strategy, training, monitoring, and governance. And while all 4 are important, you said training is really the most important one because that's really where people learn how to engage and how to do it properly. But you also mentioned that governance is something that's been evolving at Dell, and it's now a work group that kind of lives and breathes all year long, if I understood that correctly. You also talked about how the training on this topic is delivered by the trainers, and you named them all. I don't have all their names. I certainly know Amy and Sean. I don't know them all, but they're awesome. And I've had some of that exposure from my podcast episode with Amy Heiss, who runs Social Media and Community University, and they're the ones that are actually training and communicating the legal requirements. It's integrated into the curriculum, and I love that. And how you mentioned that there's been 2 waves of social media. In the earlier years, it was new. People that wanted to get involved got involved. Now it's more mainstream, and so some people are being forced into integrating social media into the job, whether or not they want it. And so you've kind of maybe shifted the program a little bit and gotten 8 hours and down into 4 hours in training. And again, the legal elements of it are integrated into that. And we talked about the guidelines that you provide as a corporation, and you've got public social media policy based on 5 principles. It's available at dell.com/social media policy. Of course, we'll link that up in our show notes. And Ryan, you said that the number one thing that people should be thinking about is to disclose their relationship with their own brand as they're posting online. And you talked about how in the case of Dell, people use the hashtag #IWorkForDell anytime they're posting anything that includes content about Dell, about the brand that they work for. And even though the FTC guidelines are a little bit gray, they really kind of guide you to think about the person who's reading it, and would they think any differently if they knew that you work for that brand. And if so, then you should disclose it. So that's kind of the high points of our conversation, and I'd like to know if there's anything you'd like to elaborate on or clarify.
No, I think you hit all of them, and I think that if there's kind of one line to summarize at least the impact for training on social media risk, and that includes the legal elements, it's a line from the greatest show of all time, Hamilton, which is that you can't put a fire from inside the house. and that's true in the midst of a social media crisis, right? It's really hard to prevent anything once it's already happened. So you've got to prevent it ahead of time by implementing that training, and you'll see so much return on that investment, and that's really the key lesson there.
I love the lesson, and I love the reference to Hamilton. Thank you, Ryan. All right, terrific. Well, before we segue into my closing, where would you like to send people online to learn more about you and what you're doing at Dell? And, of course, my listeners know that we will link that up in the show notes.
I think the easiest is you can see my profile on LinkedIn, or I do tweet about a number of things, but that includes social media legal topics, at Some Geek Lawyer. At Some Geek Lawyer. That's awesome. And again, we will link that up in the show notes. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Social Business Engine podcast to talk about something that, quite frankly, some people might consider uninteresting, but in the context of social business, it is a necessary topic. Every brand needs to understand the legal risks of engaging in social, and you have made it easy and enjoyable. Thank you.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Ryan Garcia, Legal Director at Dell. I certainly did. And I do want to remind you, of course, that this episode is sponsored by Outward Media, Inc., a leader in the direct marketing industry. I want to invite you to download OMI's ebook, The Executive's 15-Minute Guide to Building a Successful Email Marketing Database, to discover the essentials for improving email deliverability. You can get your copy now at outwardmedia.com/SBE. And of course, you can also find this link on the show notes page for this episode. Hey, before I close out this episode, I want to remind you to come over to our website and become a member of the Social Business Engine community. Membership is totally free, and we provide premium content that we make available only to our members. Our community is made up of thousands of business professionals whose common interest and passion is around social media strategy, social technology, and social culture to create better business results and also to improve their career. Again, it's really easy. Just hit our website at socialbusinessengine.com and you can't miss it. Well, hey, that's going to do it for episode 122. I want to thank my guest once again, Ryan Garcia, Legal Director at Dell. This is Bernie Borges wishing you continued success on your social business journey.